Hello students, welcome to EPG Patashala. Myself Dr. Nagratna, currently working as Senior Assistant Professor of Law at National Law School of India University, Bangalore. Let's have a look at a module titled A Critique of Protection of Civil Rights Act. The object of this module is to understand the legal approach adopted by India then and now to eradicate the practice of untouchability and thereby promote civil rights. To also critique the current legal approach in this regard. Let's get into the issue of this enactment and the importance of this enactment. Discrimination of any kind, unless is lawfully permitted for a justifiable reason, is a social wrong. Social justice requires treating such discrimination as legal wrong, thereby imposing appropriate sanctions. Discrimination based on casteism is in fact a menace India is struggling to prevent since time immemorial. It is for this purpose that various laws, including through the provisions of the Indian Constitution and special enactments, that the country is trying to regulate this kind of menace as well as prohibit these kind of menaces. Let's conceptually understand certain terms. The term untouchability was defined by the National Human Rights Commission in its report on prevention of atrocities against scheduled castes, and this is popularly in fact termed as the Saxena Committee report. The report defines it as the practice evolved as social restrictions in sharing food, access to public places, and denial of access to drinking and water sources, etc. According to Baba Saheb B.R. Ambedkar, untouchability is the notice of defilement, pollution, contamination, and a ways and means of getting rid of defilement. It is a case of permanent hereditary stain which nothing can cleanse. Thus, untouchability connotes clear violation of civil rights. While civil rights generally refers to personal liberties that belong to an individual owing to his or her status as a citizen or a resident of a particular country or community, the Oxford Dictionary defines untouchable as of or belonging to the lowest caste Hindu group or the people outside the caste system. The term indicates absence of illegal discrimination, including discrimination based on caste. Section 2A defines civil rights as any right accruing to a person by reason of the abolition of untouchability by Article 17 of the Constitution. In Jai Singh and Another versus Union of India and others, the High Court of Rajasthan observes, I quote, that this article, that is Article 17 of the Indian Constitution, does not define untouchability. Parliament has in fact passed a statute called the Untouchability Offences Act of 1955. The title of the act was changed by Parliament by an amendment act that was passed in 1976. The act is now called as the Protection of Civil Rights Act. The expression civil right is defined as any right accruing to a person by reason of the abolition of untouchability by Article 17 of the Constitution. This act also does not attempt any definition of the word untouchability. The absence of a clear definition of the term untouchability in fact has given rise to various legal concerns. Let's now look at the legal approach that is adopted by the state towards implementing this law. Right to equality and equal treatment is in fact enshrined as a part of fundamental right under the Indian Constitution. According to Article 14, the state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or the legal protection of the laws within the territory of the country. Article 15 further prohibits discrimination on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. The proviso prohibits discrimination by stating that the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of these. No citizen shall on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them be subjected to any disability or liability or restriction or condition with regard to access to shops, public restaurants, hotels, and other public places of entertainment, etc., the use of wells, tanks, bathing ghats, roads and places of public resort maintained wholly or partly by the state funds or dedicated to the use of general public, state must ensure that the person is not discriminated on the grounds as mentioned beforehand. At the same time, the Constitution provides for protective discrimination. Article 15 states under clause 4 that nothing in this article or clause 2 of the article 29 shall prevent the state from making any special provision for advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens of or scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. While clause 5 of this article states that nothing in this article or in subclause G of clause 1 of the article 19 shall prevent the state from making any special provision by law for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes or for the scheduled tribes, insofar as such special provisions relate to their admission into educational institutions, including private educational institutions, whether aided or unaided by the state, other than the minority educational institutions which are referred to in clause 1 of article 30. Further, Article 16 protects equality of opportunity in matters of public employment and also states that no citizen shall, on the grounds only of religion, race or caste, sex, descent, place of birth, residence or any of them, be made ineligible or discriminated against in respect of any employment or office under the enactment. According to Article 35, it is only the Union government which is empowered to make laws in relation to matters that come under clause 3 of Article 16. On the other hand, Article 17 of the Indian Constitution aims to abolish untouchability by stating that untouchability is abolished and its practice in any form is forbidden. The enforcement of any disability arising out of untouchability shall be an offence punishable in accordance with the law. In order to further implement this provision, the Untouchability Offences Act of 1955 was enacted. This act was amended and renamed in 1976 as the Protection of Civil Rights Act. In addition, in 1989, the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act was also enacted. Apart from these above-mentioned constitutional provisions, Article 46 directs the state to promote with special care and educational and economic interests of weaker sections of the people and in particular of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and shall protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Let's now look at the Protection of Civil Rights Act and its salient features and some of the important provisions under the enactment. Section 3 of the Act criminalizes certain acts done on the ground of untouchability, such as preventing a person's entry into any place of public worship which is open to other persons professing the same religion or any section thereof, as such person, or preventing a person from worshipping or offering prayers or performing any religious services in any place of public worship or bathing in or using waters of any sacred tank, well, spring or watercourse or rivers or lake, or bathing at any ghat of such tank, watercourse, river or lake. These offences are subjected to imprisonment for a period of not less than 1 month, which can in fact extend up to 5 months of imprisonment duration. It is also subject to imposition of fine between ₹100 and up to ₹500. According to Section 4 of the Act, a person who enforces social disability can be punished with imprisonment between 1 month to 6 months and fine between ₹100 to ₹500. According to this section, enforcing social disability means a person on the ground of untouchability enforces against another person any disability in relation to access to any public shop, public restaurant, hotel or place of public entertainment, or disables a person from using any utensils and other articles kept in public restaurant, hotel, dharmashala, sarai or musafir khana for the use of general public, or prevents a person to practice any profession or carrying on any occupation, trade or business or employment in any job. or prevents a person from using or accessing any river, stream, spring, well, water tap or other watering places, or any bathing hut, burial or cremation ground, and any sanitary convenience, any road or passage, or any other place or public resort which other members of the public have right to use or have access to. Or if he prevents a person from using or accessing any place used for a charitable or public purpose, maintained wholly or partly out of the state funds, or dedicated to the use of general public, or prevents a person from enjoying any other benefits under a charitable trust which is created for the benefit of general public, or prevents a person from using or accessing any public conveyance, or prevents a person from making any construction, acquisition or occupation of any residential premises in any public locality, or prevents a person from using any dharmashala, sarai or muzaffir khana which is open to general public, or prevents a person from observing any social or religious customs, usages or ceremonies, or prevents him from taking part in or taking out any religious or social or cultural procession, or prevents a person from making use of any jewelry or finery. However, it is essential to understand that these rights, guaranteed through provisions like the above mentioned, are only enforceable against public property and not against private property. In the case of Benudha Sahu was a state, the court ruled out the application of this provision to private wells. Further, Section 5 of the Act punishes refusal to admit persons to hospitals, dispensary, educational institutions or any hostel, etc. Section 6 punishes refusal to sell goods or render services on the ground of untouchability. Section 7(1) punishes other offences arising out of untouchability, which includes preventing any person from exercising any right accruing to him by reason of abolition of untouchability under Article 17 of the Indian Constitution, acts of molesting, causing injuries, annoyance, obstruction, causing or attempting to cause obstruction to any person in exercise of any such right, or inciting or encouraging another person or class of persons or public to practice untouchability in any form, either by words which are either spoken or written, or by signs, or by any other visible representations, or otherwise insulting or attempting to insult on the ground of untouchability a member of a scheduled caste. Section 7(1)(a) further imposes punishment upon a person who commits any offence against the person or property of any individual as a reprisal or revenge, or his having exercised any right accruing to him by reason of abolition of untouchability under Article 17 of the Constitution. This also includes offences of causing denial to any person belonging to his community or any section thereof any right or privilege to which such person would be entitled as a member of such community or section, or taking any part in the excommunication of such person on the ground that such person has refused to practice untouchability, or that such person has done any act in furtherance of the objects of this act. It is important to note that the Act provides for multiple sanctions against certain offences, which can be seen through provisions like Section 8. According to Section 8, if a person is convicted of an offence under Section 5 and also holds any license under a law relating to any profession, trade or calling or employment with regard to which the offence is committed, then the court, apart from punishing him under Section 6, can also additionally cancel or suspend such license. Hence, for an example, if the offence is committed by a person by not allowing another person into his hotel on the ground of untouchability, his hotel license can be cancelled or suspended. Similarly, according to section 9, if a manager or a trustee of a place of public worship or educational institution or hostel which is in receipt of a grant of land or money from government is convicted of an offence under the enactment, such grant may be suspended either in part or incomplete by the concerned government if it is warranted according to the circumstances of the case. Section 10A of the Act further empowers state government to collect fine according to the enactment, but only after conducting an inquiry of the offence. And these offences can include offences committed by inhabitants of an area who are concerned with or abetting the commission of any offence punishable under the enactment, or harbouring the persons who committed the offences under the enactment, or for failing to render essential and possible assistance in discovering or arresting a person who has committed an offence under the enactment, or in suppressing material evidence of the commission of such offence. Further, repeated offenders get enhanced punishment under the enactment under section 11. According to section 11, if a person is already been convicted of an offence under this enactment or of the abetment of commission of such an offence and is again convicted of a similar offence or its abetment, he can be punished for the subsequent or the second time's conviction with imprisonment for a term between 6 months to 1 year, and can also be subjected to fine between 200 to 5,000 rupees. This can further be extended to imprisonment for a term which can extend between 1 year to 2 years and fine between 5,000 to rupees 1,000. The Act to an extent also adopts strict liability approach. The Act provides for presumption based liability under section 12, and according to this section, where any act constituting an offence under this enactment is committed in relation to a member of scheduled caste, the court shall presume, unless contrary is proved, that such act was committed on the ground of untouchability. The Act also criminalizes preliminary offences, which is otherwise called as inchoate offences or incomplete offences, such as attempt to commit an offence. According to section 10 of the enactment, whoever abets any offence under this act shall be punishable with imprisonment that can extend as stipulated under the act. And in fact, the statutory explanation provided to this section further widens the scope of this provision by clarifying that a public servant who wilfully neglects the investigation of any offence punishable under this enactment shall be deemed to have been abetted an offence punishable under this act. Hence, abetment being another inchoate offence is covered under the enactment. Further, section 14 of the enactment also imposes liability upon the officers of the company. This by imposing liability upon a person who at the time of commission of an offence was in charge of the affairs of the company and doesn't take care of regulating the commission of the offences in his company can in fact be held liable under the enactment. However, if such person proves that he had no knowledge of such offence commission or this offence has been committed despite due diligence being taken by him to prevent the commission of such offence, he shall not be liable. However, if such offence is committed with his consent, that is, the consent of the officer in charge of the affairs of the company, such as the director, the manager, the secretary, or any other similar officer, then such director, manager, secretary, or such other officer can also be punished in addition to the punishment that is imposed upon the company. Let's now look at the procedural issues that are covered under the enactment. The Act makes all the offences cognizable in nature, thereby imposing an obligation upon the investigating officer to register the case, that is, to register the first information report, that is, an FIR, and also obligates him to investigate the matter. Further, according to section 15, the concerned investigating officer can arrest the accused without a warrant. This indicates the seriousness of the offence as is been indicated by the procedural provisions. Further, all offences except where it is punishable with imprisonment for a minimum term exceeding 3 months needs to be tried summarily by the judicial magistrate of first class or in a metropolitan area by a metropolitan magistrate in accordance with the procedure which is established under CRPC. This provision, by requiring summary trial procedure, ensures speedy trial and completion of the trial in a limited period. And this is what you can see under section 15. However, to an extent the Act provides a procedural protection to public servants committing offence under the Act, which in fact has been a ground of criticism of the enactment. According to section 15(2), previous sanction is required to try a public servant who is alleged to have committed an offence of abetment of an offence punishable under this enactment, while acting or purporting to act in the discharge of his official duty. Such previous sanction is in fact required by the central government if such public servant is employed in connection with the affairs of the union government, or it shall be required to be taken from the state government if such public servant is employed in connection with the affairs of a state government. The Act through section 16A bars application of Probation of Offenders Act if the offender has crossed 14 years of age. Further, according to section 265A of the Criminal Procedure Code, plea bargaining is also not allowed in relation to the offences covered under this enactment. Section 15A, subsection 2, clause I of the Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955 provides for adequate facilities including legal aid to the person subjected to any disability arising out of untouchability so as to enable them to avail themselves of such rights. Section 15A2, clause 3 of the Protection of Civil Rights Act of 1955 also provides for setting up of special courts for trial of offences under this enactment. Special police stations for registration of complaints of the offences against SCs and STs have been set up by governments of Bihar, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. The National Commission for Scheduled Castes, as per Article 338, Clause 5, is duty bound to prevent atrocities against these caste people, and is also duty bound to investigate and monitor all matters relating to safeguards provided for scheduled castes under the Constitution or under any other law for the time being in force or under any order of the government, and to evaluate the working of such safeguards, and to also inquire into specific complaints with respect to the deprivation of rights and safeguards of the scheduled castes. This Commission's Atrocities and Protection of Civil Rights Wing in fact deals with cases relating to scheduled castes under the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989 and the Protection of Civil Rights Act of 1955, either on receipt of complaint from the individuals or on information received from other sources, including from media sources. The recent NCRB statistics in fact shows that there is an increase in the number of cases that are reported. In fact, there is an increase of 19.0% in 2014 over 2015's statistics. The latest available statistics also shows both state-wise as well as nation-wise increase in the number of cases that are reported under the enactment. Similar increase is also seen in the registration of cases related to these offences under the other laws including Indian Penal Code. Let's now look at the critique of this enactment. Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar had said that the name of the legislation should be in fact the Civil Rights Untouchables Protection Act, and this would in fact indicate enforcement and protection of rights in addition to imposition of punishments to the offenders as being the objective of the enactment. However, today the Act, despite the change in its nomenclature, remains only a punitive law and hardly adopts any preventive and protective approach while enforcing civil rights. Hence, the concern raised by Dr. Ambedkar remains to be an issue till date. The Act is even today used only against offences committed and has hardly any provisions which imposes obligations on the state to take preventive measures, that is to prevent commission of crimes affecting civil rights. Various states reports the number of cases under the enactment as nil, which definitely is far from the reality. Further, in 2003, only 0.56% of cases got completed the trial procedure with 99% of acquittal. And the punishment prescribed under the Act is also not deterrent in nature so as to prevent further commission of the offence. Offences under Section 3 and 4 are in fact those which deserve stringent punishment. According to this enactment, an exclusive special court of session should be established in order to try the matters at every district. However, not every court is exclusively special court, and many courts in fact are designated special courts. Let us now look at the recommendations that can address the concern more effectively. It's essential to impose and ensure strict adherence to the timely completion of investigation of cases and disposal of cases under the Act. Sensitization of investigating, prosecuting and judicial officers will help effective implementation of the enactment. Further, in the place of designated special courts, an exclusive court must be mandatorily established at all districts. Better protection of victims and witnesses may also contribute to successful procedural compliance of the law and can further prevent the witnesses and victims turning hostile. States should also adopt better preventive approach rather than focusing only on punitive approach. The Ministry of Home Affairs advisory on implementation of the enactment requires that the states shall take an undertaking so as to have a comprehensive review of the effectiveness of this enactment and its machinery at the state level so as to tackle the problems that are faced by the members of the SC and ST community, and to also take appropriate measures and to also make their law enforcement agencies under the enactment more responsible. This further states that even though some state governments have taken some measures in this regard, yet these measures needs to be further strengthened so that the members of this vulnerable group feel more secure and safe and also enjoy their human rights and live with dignity and respect that they deserve to live with. The advisory also re-emphasizes the need to implement this enactment as well as the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act more effectively, both in letter as well as in spirit. According to the ministry, actions required to be urgently taken includes ensuring that the first information report FIR is invariably registered by police station wherever and whenever a complaint of atrocity is received. In the case of registration of FIR, if he is denied by the police officer on duty without any valid reason, then such officer, being not a member of that concerned community, in fact should be prosecuted for such non-compliance of a legal mandate. This also requires ensuring investigation of offences of atrocities by an officer not below the rank of Deputy Superintendent of Police, who shall complete the investigation on top priority within the stipulated period, and also requires further sensitization of police officers with regard to the implementation of this enactment and other regulations. This further requires effective training of police officers, special public prosecutors and the concerned district administration officers along with judicial officers, and also can have many other awareness programs that can enhance the better implementation of the law. Displaying salient features of the enactment on the billboards or hoardings in all police stations, especially in the rural areas and other selected places frequently visited by public, launching, as earlier said, awareness generation campaigns and organizing seminars related to the provisions of the enactment are the additional measures that can be taken. To conclude, we can say that although legislations like the Protection of Civil Rights Act have a dismal record of enforcement, they carry a symbolic value. India treats caste discrimination as a serious form of human rights violation. Offences affecting civil rights are social concern. The problem hence must be addressed holistically and not just with an legal enactment. As was rightly opined by Ilia Perumal Committee, the problem of untouchability is therefore inseparably linked up with the question of caste system and the social setup based on that. It is an indisputable fact that the caste system is the dominating social force in our country. Hence, any attempt to remove untouchability without striking at the root of the caste system is simply to treat the outward symptoms of a disease or to draw a line on the surface of the water. Untouchability cannot be abolished in this country unless the social order is changed by establishing new values, and for this purpose, the values based on the Hindu religion must be changed too. In addition, it is essential to make appropriate changes to the existing laws so as to make it more stringent and deterrent in nature, thereby including the increasing of the extent of punishment that is already prescribed. More preventive measures are also required to be adopted. As was rightly said by Honorable Justice Shri P. S. Narayana, I quote, social equality cannot be forced upon people by laws of the state unless the sentiment of equality produces great challenges in our social habits and social institutions. Social equality is a difficult ideal to attain, but if the sentiment of social equality is carefully and wisely cultivated, it is sure to make a considerable addition to the realization of social justice. I unquote.